We start from Pasuk Yud Aleph, Parsha Shmos. Vayasimu olav sori misim, laman anosam sivlosam. They placed upon them officers, taskmasters, laman anosam sivlosam, to afflict them in their suffering. It's interesting. Because it says, laman anoso, to afflict them. What does it mean? Laman anoso b'sivlosam, to afflict them in their suffering. If the suffering, they're afflicted. Now we're going to speak in a moment that each Jew had to produce a certain quota of bricks. What happens if he didn't produce that quota? So he was beaten. What about if he was able to produce the quota? What did they do? So it says in the Midrash, every time they met the quota, they would increase the quota. Why? Because the whole idea was not only to produce, to enslave them, but to bring about a level of work which would destroy them. So Hashem says, do you think you can increase the workload? That will destroy them. Just to the contrary. The more you afflict them, the more they increase in number. It's counterproductive. The whole objective of increasing the quota is because they can't humanly address that quota. They'll be able to address it. Because there'll be enough Jews. The children are going to be born to them in such numbers that those numbers will be able to address whatever those numbers are, whatever those quotas may be. So it's L'man Anosim Sivlosam. It's not only L'man Anosim, but Sivlosam is as difficult it is, but it's even to afflict with go beyond the pale, and they kept pushing the envelope. Hashem says, you want to push the envelope? We'll take it to the next level. Hashem says, I'm going to go toe to toe with you. That's the understanding. Now, what's the next thing? What's L'man Anosim? Now it goes, Vayivin Ori Mishklos L'Paro is piece of his Ramses. They built fortified cities for Paro, Pisim and Ramses. Take a look at Rashi. Olav Alam, Misim, Loshem Mas. It's from the word Mas means taxed. Sorim Shigov Menamamas, officers which collected the tax. What was the tax? The quotas. Even the Ori Miskanos, Leparo. That was the tax. They had to produce that. Lamanoso Visivlosim Shel Mitzrayim. Ori Miskanos Targumo. Gizbar Amun ala Otsoros, as Piece of Ram says. Why did they have to build these cities? Shlo Hirus Mitchilo Lekach. These cities were actually weak cities, weakened, and they had to build fortified cities. They strengthened them and they fortified them that they could be used for what? For an otza, for storage. So now there's a Maral. He cites the Midrash. And Paro, as we discussed, name of Rabbeinu Bachio, the Egyptian civilization was built on Ayin Pei Reish. The word offer, that outside of the realm of physicality, nothing exists. There's no spiritual world. The value of the spiritual world is purely to provide for the physical world. There's nothing supernatural. The only thing which was supernatural was what seemed to be supernatural, was witchcraft. Through witchcraft, you were able to change the physicality of the world. But even witchcraft is rooted in the physicality of the world. The impurity of existence. But anything above that, nothing existed. That's how we explained why Paro had adjured Yosef that he could not divulge, 71 languages. 71 always indicates there's something beyond the 70, that it could be contained within one person beyond the 70. Paro was out to prove that the Jewish people are no different than any other people. We're all physical people. If you're physical people, that means you're subject to the physical. What is the physical? That you have a capacity, and if you act and your capabilities based on your physical buildup, essence. What happens if you take that physical essence and you wear it down? It becomes less productive. Person's weak, cannot produce. You're stronger, you produce. So he's going to prove that the Jewish people are a physical people. They're not a spiritual people. There's no soul. The soul is not a spiritual component which lives beyond physical existence. Even what goes beyond, that's part of the physical. There's no spiritual component which has to do with a God, which borders on the infinite. No such thing. So what did Hashem do? And how were they going to prove it? By wearing down the physical of the Jew, giving him a level of work which is beyond human capacity, and which normally would destroy a human being, which would cause them to be less prolific, not to be able to procreate. Because in the weakened state, you can't proliferate, just to the contrary. The more they wore down their physicality, it brought forth the greater, it magnified their spiritual component. When you're a physical being, you have limitation. Therefore, you can have one child, two children, in every birth. Now that you wore away that physicality, I'm telling you, the Maharal of Prague, now Hashem says, I'm going to show you who they are. Just as the soul borders on the limitless, their capabilities is unlimited. Therefore, they were able to produce 6 in 1 litter continuously. After a while, a woman gives birth to so many children, she can't give birth any longer because the body is so weakened, is so drained, becomes so weak. No, the more you afflict them, the more you malnourish them, you drain them, the more, because that's going to magnify their core. And what's the core? The core is their soul, right? That's the morale. So there was this tug of war here. I will prove, Hashem's, you'll prove nothing. Just to the contrary. The more you afflict them, the more they're going to procreate, the more prolific they become. Now, what was Pisum and Ramses? Pisum and Ramses. Now, how do you quantify the value of a person? So in the United States, how do you quantify a person? Based on the gross national product. What do you produce? What's your worth? Your worth is based on what you're able to produce financially, materially. I will prove what you are. What's your capability? So he gave them the task to have to build these 2 fortified cities, Pisum and Ramses. So after they would finish building these cities, what would happen? They say, this is your value. This is what you're all about. You know what happened when they finished building Pisum and Ramses? There's an argument in the Midrash between Rav and Shmuel. The moment they finished building it, you know what happened to Pisum and Ramses? The walls just crumpled, just fell apart. Another interpretation in the Midrash is, as they built Pisum and Ramses, the city sunk into the ground. It sunk, did not stand. The foundation, everything was just swallowed up by the ground. Again, this is to prove, you want to prove that this is what they are because this is what they're able to produce, which is the physical. That's not what they're about. Therefore, either crumpled or it's actually sunk into the ground. So in actuality, it never happened that Paro ever succeeded in bringing about his objective, that these cities ever became fortified. But the main objective wasn't just to fortify cities, was to prove that this is the value and the essence of the Jewish people. Hashem says that's not what they're about. Also, and as they afflicted them, they increased in number, and there was like a population explosion. The Egyptians, they became disgusted with the Jewish people. I mean, as much as we try to get rid of them and prove our point, everything is to the contrary. We're trying to prove. We try to minimize them. They just keep increasing. We try to prove, as the Maharal says, again, it's not happening. The Akutsu, let's see, there's a famous Rashi on this. So now this is interesting. As they even contemplate to afflict them, at that same moment, Hashem already is planning to what degree they're going to increase in number and be numbers which are not fathomable, uncomputable numbers. You know what Rashi says? Not as they even can contemplate afflicting them. The numbers already, God already is planning how to increase the numbers. To what degree to increase their numbers? Cain Yirbe, Cain Robo v'Chain Poratz, Medrasha Ruach Kodesh Omer. You're saying Cain. Aten Omrim Pen Yirbe. You're saying they may increase. Ani Omer Cain Yirbe. You're saying they may. I say they will. Now, I once discussed, Alan. You would remember this maybe. That it says Rashi cites the Chazal as they're contemplating and planning to afflict us. Hashem already is planning how to increase our numbers and how those numbers are going to be not computable numbers, yifrots. They will team in number. What is this all about? As they're considering planning to afflict us, Hashem is planning to increase our number. Say it the other way. As they afflict us, we're increasing. God is planning in advance. As they plan, he plans. What exactly is this planning? And God responds to that planning. So he once said, how many Jews left Egypt? Ernie, how many Jews left Egypt? Only 20% of the number. Right? 80% perished during the days of darkness. Now, there was a critical mass had to leave Egypt. What was that number? 600,000 males above the age of 20. That had to be the number. That when it was time to leave, after 210 years, you had to have that number. These are males, so they had wives, they had children. So we're talking about millions of people left Egypt. If you had 600,000 males above the age of 20, so they had wives and they had minimally 5 children, 10 children, and they all left. And this is only 20%. So to have 20% at the end of the day, how many Jews initially do you have to have? You have to have staggering numbers. Because this is ultimately, there's only 20% leaving at the end of the day. So therefore, as they plan to afflict them, Hashem is planning to what? To increase their number. Because if the number is not at that critical number of 600,000 males, the Jews are not leaving Egypt. So as they torture us, as they kill us, as they do whatever they do to us, ultimately that's going to minimize us. No, because Hashem will not allow it, because God is planning to increase our number, because we have to have that number at the end of the day. So as much as they want to lessen our number, and they plan how to lessen it, Hashem is planning to increase it. Because at the end of the day, we have to have those 600,000 males above the age of 20. Or just this point. It says in Sanhedrin, who was the architect of the bondage of Egypt? That was Bilam. Bilam Arosha. Bilam, what was his objective? Bilam represents evil. And that's why he was the counterforce to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the ultimate, he was the prophet of the Jews. He represented God's presence in the world. Bilam wanted to remove that. He was the counterforce. It says, Lokom Nav Yisrael Kamoshe. There was no greater Navi in Yisrael like Moshe Rabbeinu. But what's the inference? But among the nations of the world, there was a Navi as great as Moshe. So that's a whole discussion. It wasn't all aspects of his prophecy. But there was a certain element, he was the equivalent. He was the counterforce. All Bilam wanted to do was to snuff out, there shouldn't be any Kedusha. God's presence, there should be no representative of God's presence in the world. Through the bondage, initially was to eradicate them. Because they themselves, if they take over Egypt, they're going to turn Egypt into a holy edifice. It's God's presence is going to dictate there. It turned out they didn't have to destroy them physically, because, as I said, it turned out an economic boom for Egypt. But now that it's an economic boom for Egypt, it's okay. You know why? Because now they're no longer believers. Now they become pagans. The ones who originally represented God, they're no longer representing God any longer. All there is, they look like Jews. They dress like Jews. They talk like Jews. And they have Jewish names. But what are their beliefs? Their beliefs are what? Pagan beliefs. Bilam succeeded. But he didn't realize at the end of the day, when God starts shining the light, which are the 10 plagues, things are reverting back to what they originally were. Kedusha will blossom and thrive and overtake Egypt. But that was the whole idea here. Hitler, Yamar Shmo, the final solution was Amalek. Not one solitary Jew would be alive. That wasn't the objective. That wasn't Bilam's objective. It was only to eradicate what they represent, but they could continue as an ethnic group called Jews. It means nothing. Now, Jewish cuisine, Jewish names, Jewish language, it all means nothing. Bilam was okay with that.
So can I ask a question? So the notion